Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the One Take Podcast. On today's episode, we are going to continue our little Warhammer 40k segment, and we're going to be now talking about the next stage after you've chosen an army, starting to assemble it by any of the kits. Yeah, I'm already messed up. But anyway, let's continue. So you'll usually choose your first. You'll choose your first starting army, and now you'll buy the kits. You'll open the package, and then you'll look and just see a bunch of essentially rectangular plastic with a bunch of parts in there. Now, you might be wondering, what do you do now? How do I continue? Well, fret not, because that's what I'm here today to talk to you about. Now, I will be using an example today, and that example is going to be the Eldari Harlequin Troop box set, and that may or may not be because that is the one I currently have in my hand. So now, first off, you're going to need to know what tools you'll need. Now, for assembling miniatures, the three main tools you're going to need are some small pliers to cut the pieces out of the sprue, a scalpel to get the last tiny bit that the pliers really can't get off the miniatures once the parts are cut off, and of course you'll need some super glue to glue the whole miniature together. And now let's just get right into it and I'll start explaining some parts of this. So, when you first open your booklet, which you might get, you'll sometimes see that there'll be variations. These will usually be colored by one being blue and the other being green. The usual distinction you'll see is just like the piece will be that color when gluing it on. Or blue will just be used to show variations for, say, if you have a unit instead of just one model in the box. Like this example, the Harlequin Troop. In the Harlequin Troop box, it'll show you all 6 of the leg configurations as it is a 6-man unit. So it will go through gluing each individual 6 legs together in one section because those are parts that are wholly unique for each model. So it'll go through, for example, the first one has parts 1 and 2. Now, you might be confused on what parts 1 and 2 are. That is very easy to tell, actually. Now, when you look at the sprue, you'll see that one side is completely flat and will completely flat on one side and will have little numbers. Well, if you flip it to the other side, the edges of the sprue will be raised up in a triangular fashion and have little cylinders poking up from where it was standing when being created. You want to stay on the flat side because that'll have all the numbers that'll show which parts they can clip out. But if you are confused, you can always look at the picture in the actual instructions and try and find the piece that matches with the picture. That is always an option. So now, after you first glue your legs in, you'll then move on to the next stage, building the body. Now, this is your stock standard same old. But so the legs, body will usually be the same, but it's the heads and arms on a lot of figures that will change depending on what you're building. Now, because I'm going to preface this by saying, you probably will have to look at the data sheet, but you'll see that some units can have weapon variations or war gear options. This will be shown in the actual book by showing that there are multiple different weapons you can equip to the model to figure out what you want, what you need. Now, if you go to the back of the book, it'll show photos of each individual weapon variation that there is, as well as the stats for that weapon. But if you really want to get a good in-depth look and see what the unit composition would be, I'd highly recommend looking online or trying to find data cards that can possibly show this, so that way you know what to be looking for. Now, you will see in some boxes it says you can build variations, like in the troop box, for example, it says you can build your regular players and also a leader player. The leader player is the commander of this small unit, usually giving it a buff, and can be, not sure, but I believe is required for the unit. Usually it is good to build the leader character as it will give a bevy of bonuses to the unit as a whole. But if you're picking up a second box to make like the entire unit size at its max, you can then just build all of them as the regular players, as you already have the leader player to lead them. This can be stated for multiple boxes, including Space Marines, Chaos, and all the other factions that have this unit type in boxes. Now that you've decided on your weapon variations, your loadouts, and all of that, it is now time to move on to the assembly stage. So, what you're gonna want to do is go to the first page of your instructions, open them up, and see what it's asking you to build first. You then grab the sprue, you go looking through the sprues and seeing which one has the lowest numbers you can find first, because that will usually have the ones you need to start with, as the book will always go from 1 to the highest number, unless there's variations where they might move around a bit because of that. But now that you got it, you now look for number 1 and 2, for example, of the Harlequin troop. You can cut both these out using the pliers you bought. You just snip the tiny little nubs that come off the branches of the sprue that hold them all in place. After you do that, you may notice there's a tiny bit left that the pliers simply can't get. This is where you grab your scalpel and carefully try and slice that off. Make sure you do it away from yourself, as some of them can need a bit of force, and when they let go, it can result in the scalpel going a bit further than what you want, and if it's going towards your finger, it can and will cut you. Trust me, I've had that happen to me quite a few times. Now, after you do that, you can then glue the miniature together. In the book, it'll show a yellowed out section on the miniature. This is the connection point between both miniatures, and where you should be putting the glue onto to glue them together. Now, what you do is you put a tiny bit of glue on only one of the pieces, then you hold them together for a couple seconds, depending on the glue, and you'll notice that you should be able to lightly let go of one, and it'll hold there. Now, what you want to do is carefully put it down and let it keep drying, as if you try and put any pressure on to pull them apart, they will usually come apart, as the glue should not fully be dry by now, or it might be, depending on the brand you get. Now, an important part is that some parts it might be easier not to glue together before you start painting. This will usually be your capes or like drapey piece of clothing that will go over other parts that might make it difficult later on to go under and paint. So keep in mind, you do not have to glue the entire miniature together before you paint it at all. It's up to you and what you think will be easier to paint. But in this video, we'll only be going over the basics of both assembling miniatures and painting today, not going into the hyper specifics like using green stuff to fill in gaps now, because that, even to be honest, even I'm not fully up to that level, and that can be some like insane sculpting you need to do. But yes, another thing to mention now that I've reminded myself is mold lines. Now, on some piece of the model, you'll see this light grey line that comes up a bit. This is the mold line from where two pieces were combined together to make the piece. Now, there is a way to remove this to make your model just look a bit more smooth. You actually flip your scalpel over to its backside of the blade and you lightly rub it against this. This will make sure you don't damage this will only really get the line off, and it won't actually damage the actual proper part of the mold, making it all smooth and easier to paint and look nice. And that's the basics of what you gotta do. So first, you glue the legs together. Now, you move on to the torso. The torso can have variations on it. It says you can use 13, 14, and 15 to put together onto two pieces that are 19. Some pieces will have variations like this, where you can change it up a bit, and they'll work for those pieces. So pick and choose which ones you want, as long as they fit into the guidelines, and you just glue them all together. Keep them separate. Now, you can clip out the weapons that you want. Make sure you've read about which ones you want, but it won't entirely matter, as usually people won't mind if you say this guy has this weapon instead, as we can all understand you want to either try out a new weapon or you accidentally put on the wrong one. It's really hard for small miniatures to do the whole, if you like, put magnets in the arm to switch out weapon variations because of how spindly the limbs are. This really only works for big mechs or bigger monsters, as their limbs are a lot thicker, so it's easy to get the magnet to slot in without making the entire arm lose structural integrity. So now you clipped out your weapons. You can now clip out the type of head you want. For Harlequins, it is the back part of the head that has the hairpiece and the mask, as there are many variations of the mask that will all work with each individual back hairpiece, so pick and choose at your own leisure. Now that you've done that, you can begin to glue. The first section is showing you how to glue the leader character together. So you put his unique leg on the base, the unique body for him, then you move on to his weapons and head. You'll be able to tell which each variation has their own unique glue part based on the background of the page. For example, in this book, the blue leader has a light blue background to all the stages that are specifically for him, while for the regular players, any stages that are specific to them, or the variation that comes from the leader player, have the light green background. But usually you'll have stock standard white for just the general like assembly parts that will not change based on variation, or for the units that just don't have variation in the book. So now that you finished your leader character, which keep in mind, not gonna lie, I thought this section would go on a lot longer, but I just realized it's really easy to kind of speed run this book. And I'm trying to speak a lot slowly as well now, so it's going quite fast. Now you'll just build all your characters, putting together the parts it say would work together. Usually, the head parts or tiny accessories will have variations you can do, so please enjoy picking and choosing what you want. Now you've glued them all together, and my suggestion is do not glue them on the base before you've started painting them. I know this can be weird, but in my preference usually, I prefer not to put the miniature on the base, as there can be some parts underneath the miniature you want to get into and paint, and usually if you want to do painting on the actual base and put some like rocks or terrain for it, it can be really hard to try and paint when you have to try and go around the miniature and not try and get the paint on it. Now, you might be asking, how can you comfortably put the miniature on the base if you put, say, rocks, sand on it, where it's going to make it bumpy? The best way I found to do that is you choose a spot you want to glue it. Then you get either a white pencil or a bit of white paint, and this is before you finish painting the miniature. You do a white line around that area using the paint, sticking it a bit onto the miniature to ensure you get the right shape, and you take that off. And you ensure that a bit out from that area at least, you don't put anything there, and especially in the area. That way the model should just be able to easily snap in place and will look natural. And if you need to, you can put a tiny bit of rocks closer around and on it, but it would be a lot easier to paint because you only have to get those small amounts without having to go in and get the large pieces, which we can all say is quite glad. So, now that you finish your miniatures, it's on to the painting step. Now, for painting, what you are going to need is your paintbrushes, some paint, usually preferably miniature paint, as it is designed to be used in small quantities and will work well for either shading or to stick to the plastic. And you'll also need a primer to coat your miniatures in first so the paint can stick more effectively. So now what you must do is I'll go through the way I usually prime my miniatures. The way I do it is I have this long piece of wood or something you can stick to that you don't mind getting paint on. You then use a bit of blue tack to put under where they're meant to be glued on the base, because that's part you don't really need to paint, so it doesn't matter if it doesn't get primed. Stick them all onto the wooden plank. Hold it there with usually a hand that has a glove on it to ensure you don't get a lot of paint on yourself at all. And then you make sure to evenly spray coats of primer onto all of them. Shake the can before you do so. Now, the color primer can change based on what you're doing. My usual recommendation is if you're going to use a lot of yellows, light blues, or have white, use white primer, because it'll be a lot easier to paint those colors on if you use that, which can always be a challenge. But if you're going to use a lot of dark colors like blacks, browns, your dark like leaf green, your midnight blues, using a black will be better, it'll make it look more blended in and like it's the whole color. Because if you say for example, put like a dark blue onto a white, you'll see the white easily pierce through. Well, if you put it onto a black sprayed miniature, it'll look just like the blue was on it, as the black fades more easily into the blue. So it's ultimately up to how much of one color you're going to use, as you will sometimes have miniatures that will use both light and dark colors. I'd recommend then using the light spray, as darker colors are a lot easier to like put layers on, and it will hide it easier than trying to do whites or your light colors, as that can take a lot more layers to cover it all up and just show that color. That's my recommendation. But if you're doing custodies, just use gold spray paint. That's 90% of the model painted. But yes, now after you've sprayed your miniatures, you'll need to let them dry for a couple hours. Depending how hot it is, this can take a day or a lot shorter if you got somewhere nice and dry and hot for them to dry out. After they dried out, just take them off your wooden plank and then congratulations, you now have multiple miniatures to paint. Now, you might be wondering, where do I get started on this miniature? What can I do first? So now we're going to go into what you might want to do first. So first, you're going to have an idea of a paint scheme in mind. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be what Games Workshop does. It can be however you want to do it. These are your miniatures. Paint your units any way you want to do. You can paint them like you have a reason to paint them. Like, it's a different chapter of Space Marine, for example, which is why they're all like light pink or like dark yellows, something like that. You can make your own chapter, or you can just paint them based on you think they look nice. It's ultimately up to you. But what I'd recommend you do first is you do all of your big panel layers first, or what's your main color. Going back to Harlequins, which probably isn't the best example, as anyone who's seen the Games Workshop Harlequin paint job will know, you don't want to paint them like that. Best example of honestly, paint them your own way. Now, you'll see they'll usually have shoulder pauldrons or certain legs or arms that are solid colours, or areas that are solid colours. I'd recommend you do the solid colour areas first, and then do finer details last. As solid colours, you have to get them everywhere, and it's a lot easier to put them on, as you're probably using wider strokes to try and get it everywhere to ensure it gets it. Where with finer details, there's a lot less area you're painting on, so there's a lot less area you can mess up and be like, I have to repaint that. It's easier to slowly do them, and it'll usually be a lot more satisfying, as your base color will usually be something you can easily just touch up. It won't cause that many issues to do again after it's done. So that'll be my main suggestion. So we'll go over a couple different how you can paint different things. So you have your stock standard plain colors, like your reds, blues, all that. They're just your pastel regular colors. Then you might get something like a metal paint. These will have a bit of a shine to them, so you can get that metallic feel for your swords, your guns, and any other metal objects on the mini. These paints take particularly well to just covering something, and they'll look good. Metal paints are by far one of the easiest to work with, as they'll coat the miniature pretty easily without showing any underlying, like your base coat or like what's underneath, and they'll usually kind of automatically like give themselves a wash, which I'll explain later, but it'll make it look like there's shade to it a bit with the way they come out. So metals will overall look good. But your regular colors, you'll paint them first. You paint on your first layer of whatever you want. This will be like your base or underlying layer, but we'll go with like the simple way of doing it first. Now, when you paint the sun, you might think this is looking bad. It's not looking that good. Don't beat yourself up about that. You got to remind yourself, this is not a finished product. This is not what it looks like. This is just the starting point. It can be a lot for a new painter when like, damn, I put a bit of color in this. It's not looking as good as I thought it would. You can always go back with another color later. Just do thin layers so that way it doesn't cover up the detail. But you can always go back to fix it up, or just wait until you finish the product to see how it looks with it all together, because that can usually be what turns it around in your head. When you see all of it put together, it looks better than when you're looking at one section when it has nothing else compared or like mixing with it. So we'll go with your standard clothing. First, you put a usual black layer for Harlequins, as they have a leather kind of style, so it's going to be just pure black for the leather parts of their body. You'll just paint that all regular black. Now, you might want to add a bit of line work, or like make it stand out a bit. A good way to do this is to use a color up from black, like a dark blue or something that is similar as to black but is still different. Like, I have a color here called if I can find it, because hey, who can't remember? Night Sky, which is a type of blue, but it is a very muted and dark blue. So it can mesh well with black because it's similar but also different enough to give a bit of depth and layering to it. This is a good way to do it, and if you paint it lightly on, or as you can do dry brushing, which essentially you put a bit of paint on a paintbrush, but you then rub it off onto a piece of cloth or towel, which you'll probably need to like wash off paintbrushes, as well as a pot of water, so you can clean your paintbrushes. You put it on there and you rub it off till there's practically no paint. Then you lightly flick the paintbrush back and forth on the miniature. And usually what this will do is it'll make the paint only stick to really the bumps on the outside, leaving indents covered. So it'll highlight the actual shape without covering the whole thing in paint. And this will usually make the miniature look better with some actual shading and depth look to the miniature. But as I'm pretty sure everyone knows, if you really need to make your miniature have some depth and shading to it, you just cover the thing in null oil and it will just look completely grand, because hey, that's what it's there for. It's always there for that. So we'll go over so that's the basics of, we'll say, their clothing. You can do other designs on it, like you can try, like for Harlequins, they have hexagonal patterns on them or diamonds. You can try this. Keep in mind, this is some very intense free painting, and it might not come out the way you are. You are not a machine. You are not going to get it perfect with every line. There will always be a bit of rough patches, but you have to keep in mind, this is when you're looking at right up close. When it's on a table being played, you can see the overall design, but you're not going to notice the fine, like the details like that. Plus, Harlequins, you can kind of do the design however you want. Same with Space Marines. The iconography on their shoulder pad, you could do freehand or use this, like the stickers provided. But a freehand one, you have to make it just look like this is how it would be done. Like, it doesn't have to be ultra detailed. Like, this could be like them painting it themselves. It's up to you ultimately how it goes, but you can make up your own one. Now, we'll move on to talking a bit about, we'll go over the hair the Harlequins have, because that's kind of unique. So the way hair is usually done is, the best way to do it is, you paint a solid color first, same with clothes actually, and then dry brushing lightly will make the hair instantly pop. Now, depending on if you're going to do hair like the Harlequins, you might want multicolored stuff that goes into each other. The best way to do that kind of stuff is, you start from where it is going to be the most solid color of it in the hair. So say you're painting like an orange mohawk and like a dark blue back. You start from each end, so you start the orange from the start of it, and you paint it, you not putting any more paint on until you get to the middle, and it will usually look alright. Now, you do the same for the blue, and by the time they will usually meet in the middle, both of the paints will be light enough that when you paint over one, it won't completely cover it. They'll mix together, and they'll start blending into one another. This is what you want. Trust me, this can be a very difficult process to actually get right. I've had tried it before, and sometimes it won't look good, but hey, you can always try again with it, because of how light the paint is. There's a good couple goes you can go around before getting it right. But just make sure you want to try and make it so where they're meeting is getting lighter. But a good way to do it is, you paint one section, or another way to do it is, you paint the orange section of the hair first, and you paint it solid a bit past the halfway mark, so it's in the blue area. Then for the blue, you paint it, and then you make it overlap with the orange if it's solid for a bit. Then as it lightly turns off, you can see where it's starting to mix and actually blend with each other. It's another good way to do it, because that way you only have to worry about one color being lighter, which is probably the recommended way I'd say it. The other way was just another way you can do it. It's totally up to you, whatever's easier for you figuring out how to paint. Now, we'll go over something, for example, your gems, your shiny objects, stuff like that you might want to do. Now, you don't want to use a metal paint because you're painting something that's like glass. You don't want it to look shiny like it's metal, because it's a different type of shine, it's clarity. Now, a good way to do gems is, you paint them both a good way is to use contrast. Now, what am I saying? A good way to do it is, you paint one bit with a bit of a, you paint it all one solid color first. That's just always going to be the stock standard for any type of practice that you are doing. But now, you might paint one half it a bit more of a dark color, using a bit of black or a black wash to lightly cover it in a bit of corners. And on the other side, you might use lighter colors, or make like your cartoonish little white line across. This will make it look like it's reflecting and that there's a bit of light play, and overall make it look a bit more like it's a proper gem. Because keep in mind, this is still a piece of plastic. It's never going to look as good as like a proper gem that's see-through an actual crystal. But you can make it look like it has the properties of it, which is all you sometimes need to do, and it will still look really good. You just gotta be able to play around with it and understand that it might not look good the first couple times. It never is when it comes to painting. It's all just practice. So it might be good to start with a very uncomplex, like more like Space Marines, or like my favorite army Tyranids, as they can be basic to paint, but if you get good at doing details, they can become a lot better looking. But it's not, both those armies can be ones that grow with you and like get better as you get better at painting, but won't look the worst if you're at a novice painting level if you know the basics, which I think we can all appreciate. Unlike the Harlequins, which if you're not good at painting, they won't look good. So yeah, I like, even though I like the Harlequins, I will recommend, do not start playing with Harlequins unless you're ready for the nightmare of painting them, or Thousand Suns as well. Anyone who plays Thousand Suns will understand my gripe with that, or Chaos, but Thousand Suns are worse. So that's the basics of painting. Now, we'll move on to how you might paint, say, we'll move on to how you might paint the base, or what you might add to the base. Now, the base, put it simply, is all going to be up to how you want to do it. It is probably the most like do it your way kind of part. As the base, you can make it look like whatever. You can make it look like a grassy field, a tundra, a desert, volcanic planet, or hell, make it look as alien as you want with different colored grass, neon pink, like neon pink grass, for example, or like darkish blue dirt. That's actually something I've done before. It's ultimately up to you. But usually, a good thing to do is to make sure once you've decided on a base design, the whole army keeps it so there's more uniformity between the army and making it look like they're all fighting on the same war zone. That's usually a thing in tournaments, at least, but that they'll keep an eye as like uniformity, but we won't really go into that. It's still up to you how you want to do it. Bases you can do in a couple ways. You can either just put a layer of paint on and be happy with it, it's up to you, or you can start by adding, say, some fine crushed rocks to it. The way you put these on is you put some, the way I do, you grab a paintbrush, you put a dab of wood glue on, then you spread the paint, you spread the wood glue in with the paintbrush until it covers everything with a light white layer so you know there's enough. You would then sprinkle some rocks lightly over it, and then you'll turn it sideways and shake it lightly to get the excess off. Now, you'll leave that base to dry somewhere. The glue will set, and then you'll be good with it. Now, if you want to paint these rocks, you usually have to undercoat them first to ensure the paint sticks, but then you can go wild and just kind of slop paint on it. They're really easy as you're painting the whole thing the same color, at first at least. Then maybe you want to put some areas a bit of different rock variation, so you do some light dry brushing, something like that. Now, you can actually add your own little terrain pieces, like, say, a tiny rock, or like a tiny plant, or like, if you get really into it, you could add actually like pieces of other miniatures if you become really good at building mocks, which can be a very complex thing. But it can be really rewarding if you can make it, say, like, you can make it so your space marine is standing on the corpse of a Tyranid. It can look very intimidating and can be very rewarding because you'll be like, damn, I changed the posing, but I'm not going to get into like reshaping posing as I've not really done it myself, so I don't want to try and be the example of how to do it or like tell you how to do it if I really haven't done it myself. So you might paint, you might then add a bit of grass effect to it to add some plant life to make it look lively. This has the same idea. If you just put some wood glue, then you can usually buy this grassy stock online or stuff like that. You're going to probably buy online, or you get these tiny mini shrubs from online as well, or your local game shops as well. These can be quite nice to add a bit of life to the miniature and give that extra color so the base isn't just one muted color. It can add that pop of color to make it all look very nice and appealing for everyone. But yeah, as I also said, the miniature can go anywhere on the base, but it's usually good to keep it so it's the minimal amount as hanging off the base, as miniature parts that are hanging off the base can cause some issues as well. They might bump into stuff, clip on stuff a lot easier, or fall over as the center of balance is messed up. So it's usually good to try and keep everything hanging over the base so it doesn't fall over. But it's up to you. You might be able to figure out a way to put a counterweight on. A good way to do this is you can flip the miniature upside down, get a washer that's like will fit snugly inside and glue that inside. This will usually work as a counterweight and hold the miniature, so because some of them they're always going to hang off the base regardless and will be hard to stand up. You put the washer there, it'll make them a whole lot more stable, which is always a good thing too. So you can do that if you really need to. And hey, if you got something you can stick them to, like a metal tray to use to carry, you can put a tiny magnet underneath, which will hold them in place, but still because of how far the magnet will be, because sometimes the magnet might not be touching, it'll give you just enough room to easily pluck your miniatures off. And I will say, it's usually better to grab miniatures by the base than the actual model. This can change based on your miniature, like for example, a Carnifex, you can grab that thing by the body because it is a solid brick. But like something as simple like a gargoyle, it can be more delicate if you grab them by the wings and such because they're very flimsy out there, so they could break easily. Or like we'll go an example, Mechanicus with all their servo skulls flying around. That could be difficult to pick up and they can break off. But all that really needs is a bit of glue, and you might just have to paint over the area a bit just to make it all blend a bit. And with gluing, just make sure to use the tiniest amount, as if you use too much, it'll seep out and it might add globs to the miniature that you might not want to see. But yeah, I think that's honestly about it. This topic went faster than I expected it to, but I hope all of you got something out of this. Thank you to the comment I got from the Tau player. I'm sorry I forgot your name, and if I look it up right now, it's going to waste not 5 minutes, but I'm really sorry. I'll leave you in the comments to say thank you for your idea of me trying to talk slower. I hope I have been doing it in this recording. I'm definitely trying. And as you'll notice, there is only intro music now. There's no music playing throughout. We'll see how that goes, but I might see about doing some ambience music in between that's just very low. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed today's podcast. My name is Pox, and I'll see you all in the next one.